Hello, everyone. It is Ann Duffy. Welcome to the DE podcast, Dental Entrepreneur, the Future of Dentistry. I'm so happy you're here today, and I have a very special guest for you. In fact, he wrote a wonderful article for our autumn edition of Dental Entrepreneur, the Future of Dentistry. So you'll be able to catch that article on our website, dentalentrepreneur.com. And let me tell you a little bit about him before we get started. William S. Barrett is CEO, partner, and co-chair of the National Dental Law Group at Mandelbaum Barrett PC, a full-service law firm in Roslyn, New Jersey. He has over 20 years of experience representing a wide range of businesses and a unique specialty in mergers and acquisitions. He is the co-author of the DSO decision, Winning Answers from Every Angle, and pain-free dental deals. Please help me welcome Mr. William Barrett. Hi, William. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. And how are you today? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so glad you reached out. And I really love your article. As we were talking before we came on the podcast and started recording, you don't have any skin in the game. So in a sense, no, that's not what you said. I don't have a dog in the fight.
Right. A horse in the race, a dog in a fight, whatever you want to call it. I come at it from an unbiased viewpoint.
That's right. You do have skin in the game because you've got a business, and when you start representing people, you have their back. But I love that about what you said, because we have been publishing for 20 years a very generic, unbiased magazine for the business of dentistry for young dentists. We started out with those that are just graduating, Business 101, and we have rebranded in the last couple of years to the Future of Dentistry, and we're bringing in way more of a variety of articles, and especially the DSO model, which it's lovely to bring an expert like you, because our audience that have been following us for all these years, there are some that are just getting out that are going to go into a DSO, and others that have been following us for years that are looking to sell their practices to a DSO. And so tell us a little bit about where you see the current status of dental M&As, the market, and what factors are impacting it now in the end of 22, and what do you see in the future for 23?
Yeah. So, 2022 was a very, very busy year in the marketplace for dental mergers and acquisitions. In my 25-year career doing it, it was by far the busiest year. This year has started off shot out of a cannon, just as busy as last year. And in fact, it's actually a little bit busier right now because there was no real threat to any kind of major tax code changes. Certain deals that people were pushing for in December pushed their way into January. So the year has started out very busy. And I think it's driven by a number of things. Obviously, right now, the consolidation of dental practices is a very, very big thing. There's a lot of private equity dollars behind consolidation, and also, at the same time, you have a fairly strong volume of what I call doctor-to-doctor transactions, because for those who are fighting for the preservation of private practice dentistry, they're also aware that they're competing in a market where consolidation is happening, and entrepreneurial dentists are looking at the DSO model and saying, okay, how am I going to effectively compete and win the game staying independent? And one of the strategies to do that is to acquire other practices and to create those economies of scale. In our country in general, dental practices were very parochial in their development. It wouldn't be unusual in a small town to have, 4 or 5 different dentists in a little town. And when, for many years, people contemplated, a doctor comes out of school and would say, okay, I'm going to open a practice. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to work for someone and maybe get some experience, and I'm going to open a practice. That was the path. You're either going to work with someone or open your own practice, and many did. So that was a great slice of Americana, right? And a great thing. But when you think about it in a cold-hearted, pure business sense, think about the inefficiencies, right? Where with having a small dentist on every corner in town, that's 4 different rents, that's 4 different sets of liability insurance, that's 4 different staffs, that's every staff with an office manager. You could start going down the list of repetitive expenses, and the inefficiency of it becomes glaring.
Mhm.
So that's one of the driving forces behind consolidation. And when you take that coupled with those doctors who want to compete, you get this insane M&A market that's very, very active right now. And it also drives, frankly, the value of dental practices and dental specialty practices higher at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's exciting because I really feel like most dentists went into dentistry because they wanted to be their own the owners, right? Because I mean, medicine had gone to on a different track, and they had that entrepreneurial spirit somewhere in there, or they wouldn't have chose dentistry. And so I think it is really great. I think some of the sweet spots for DSOs, like you were saying, is a smaller DSO, in the fact that they don't have to go to the bigger organizations. They can keep it small and still keep it the culture under the wraps, if you will, and have their own style without just growing into something else and having no control whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think, to phrase it a different way, for the private practitioners, it's really just taking a look at group practice, right? I think at the end of the day, what you're really talking about is, instead of me practicing as an individual, what kind of economies of scale can I create, still staying independent, but in some type of group practice where, whether it's general dentistry and specialty combining, or it's just multiple general dentists combining, but being able to maximize the economies of scale and the fixed overhead in a way that makes them more competitive, while still being independent if they choose, if that's their path. For others who, are looking to cash out, or to kind of dispose of all the administrative duties that they perhaps didn't really enjoy doing, then the DSO model might be terrific for them. It just depends on what their goals are.
Yeah, there's so many different flavors out there. It's unbelievable. And I love the idea of the DSO decision winning answers from every angle, because that is, as you were saying, a generic book on that. And I think there's so many, I'm thinking of the senior docs out there really need to look at that before they even consider it, because otherwise, and I've had the experience of a dentist that I worked for and brought in someone. It was because tax time was coming. It was December 31st. I mean, he put that deal together in about 2 weeks. To your point of, how does the tax structure look like this year versus next year and the year after? And I don't think he gave enough thought to it and didn't do enough research to be able to maximize his 35 years of building community and culture and a practice, basically on his own. And it was almost like, after the fact and after the papers were signed, I think he looked back and he thought, I should have used someone like you that is totally focused on dental mergers and acquisitions versus his buddy who was down the street that tried to help him out. And it really didn't work out. I always have said that one of the main themes of Dental Entrepreneur, William, has been use and work with people that know dental, because it's a specific niche.
And that's true. And it's fact, although self-serving, I laugh, in our first book, Pain-Free Dental Deals, for the first book that we wrote, there's a section when we talk about assembling your team. And it's one of the first things we talk about, which is, don't have your sister-in-law or brother-in-law, the divorce lawyer, handle your dental practice transaction. It will probably not go so well. It doesn't mean they're not great lawyers. It's just not their niche. And when we did the DSO decision and wrote that book, that's now become almost like a prerequisite. I tell clients, and even those who aren't clients, read the book, listen to the book, because you shouldn't go into these transactions cold. And what a lot of people don't realize is because these deals are backed by private equity, they're very sophisticated. And a lot of times, my doctor clients will look at their business and say, "Oh, I've got a nice business. It's treated me well, and it's been terrific for me and my family. But it's just my dental practice." And no, it's not just your dental practice. And when private equity looks at it, they're analyzing it like they would any other type of company or business. So all of a sudden, you're embarking on a very sophisticated transaction. There's often different layers of equity involved, with all sorts of different rights. It's not completely obvious or transparent what those rights are. The devil is buried heavily in the details. So it really is true that when you're thinking about one of these types of transactions, you really do have to have experts representing you, and it's not. It's not like even doctors who were entrepreneurial who had maybe bought a practice at some point. It's not the same type of deal.
Yes, and yeah, exactly like David and Goliath. I mean, they know so much more than, and you don't want to give them, you don't want to give your practice away. Some of your numbers, and I hope that everyone will read your article, but it's pretty mind blowing what a DSO with that expertise feels your practice is worth, what a dentist probably doesn't even see the value there, and could really shortchange himself or herself in the transaction without your help or without at least reading your book to get you started. We always say they don't know what they don't know. And DSOs haven't really been around. I mean, I don't know, how long have they really been so prevalent? I would say 10 years.
Yeah. So the key word that you said there is prevalent. It's funny because in the first chapter of the book, we talk about the history of DSOs. And actually the first DSO ever was in California in the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
Didn't call it a DSO, but effectively it was centralized management of multiple practices. And it became a thing so much that California actually passed a law not allowing a doctor to own more than 2 practices because it was so out of the box. So that was a famous Dr. Beauchamp, who was the first person to ever have, in essence, a DSO. And then you could look at in the 90s, right, and Heartland and the emergence there. And there were other DSOs along the way that were developing at the same time. But it was a small group. In fact, one of my friends is a CEO and founder of a fairly significant DSO. And he would tell me stories how in the early days when he launched that particular DSO, which is now, frankly, $1 billion company, he said, 8 people sitting at a dinner table who had different DSOs exchanging thoughts and ideas and comparing notes. So you're right. The prevalence of it, and in my career, I always say that going back 20 years ago, 1 out of every 15 deals that came into my office might have been a DSO related deal. Today, it's like 7 out of 10 that come in. I mean, it's striking how prevalent it now is. And I think that evolution has really occurred for the most part in the last 10 years. That's the explosion has occurred in the last 10, maybe 12 years. Before that, it was kind of, and for someone like me who's in this business, who does a lot of dental M&A, to only get a DSO deal here and there going back over a decade ago, it kind of shows you just how materially it has increased. And, obviously now, the statistics are constantly changing, but the last one I heard estimated 12 to 15% of dental practices throughout the country have been, quote, consolidated or a part of a consolidation. That's a lot, but it also shows you that there's an awful lot of independent practitioners that are out there practicing that have not been part of consolidation yet.
Yeah, and are starting to hear about it, right? I mean, and they do work. That's the thing, is they do work. And one of the reasons I wanted to start to promote, or at least tell the stories of the DSOs, is because there are great DSOs, there are not so great DSOs. There are great dentists and there are not so great dentists. So I think we have to all come together. There were the two different sides there for a while, that all DSOs are terrible, but that is so not true. And especially with the debt that kids are coming out with, where the young dentists are coming out of dental school, it's a great learning ground for them. And then also just the way it is, the minutia of running a business now is not like you used to be able to put your shingle out. And as long as you run a good street corner, you were probably going to be pretty successful. But the nuance of running a business and practicing clinically in an excellent standard, it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not all that easy. It's nice to share some of the burden with people who are, as you said, experts in the business.
There's so much truth to that too. I mean, even just think of the simple issue of, well, not so simple anymore, human resources and employment laws. If I open up a practice, or I have a practice, and even if I only have 3 or 4 employees, I'm now subject to all the employment laws and the compliance and wage and hour and timekeeping, and having to worry about lawsuits for wrongful termination, discrimination, harassment, and you could go on and on. I see these claims all the time because, outside of doing M&A transactions, we represent and have represented in the last 20 plus years over 1,000 dentists nationwide.
Wow.
So I get those phone calls from my entrepreneur dentists who are in private practice with, lawsuits and other issues. In fact, I was on the phone today with a client who said that, it looks like there's a trial date being set for a harassment claim that was made against him, and he wouldn't settle the claim because he didn't do anything, and it was kind of a shakedown. And now, he spent, tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees defending himself. And, it's a terrible story, but it's not an uncommon story. So, one of the advantages to DSOs is the unloading of a lot of the business administration responsibilities, things like all those compliance issues with employment laws and benefits plans and the cost of health insurance. You could go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
There's a reason why there's so much wind catching in the sails of DSOs right now. As you said, just like there's great dentists and there's not so great dentists, there are some great DSOs and there are some terrible ones. And, doing your due diligence and really taking your time with these transactions and making sure that you find the right fit, the right culture, that is critical in any transaction, but especially these.
It really is, because the people that I know that have done or bought and sold or whatever, you want to make sure that the 35 years you put into building something is going to last and your legacy will continue. And I think that is the key. And that's why you need expert help to help you, go through the steps that it takes to get in the right spot that works for you and will keep your career and your legacy alive. But I mean, now with the recession looming and all of that, we've got the economy's in kind of a slowdown. How do you see DSOs continuing to be active, and do you see that there's a slowdown in deal flow or valuations?
Yeah. So far, it's early, right? I think most of us believe, that a recession, so to speak, is already here. It maybe doesn't meet the technical definition of recession, but as you said, I think very accurately, you're feeling the pinch, the slowdown, and the economic challenges. What we've seen so far is no slowdown in volume of transactions. What I have seen, though, is a lot more abundance of caution by DSOs. There's a number of transactions I'm working on right now where the depth of preliminary questions before they even get to a letter of intent phase and doing a deeper dive and more due diligence, I'm seeing a little bit more of that. I'm also seeing, don't forget, private equity, they use capital for these deals. They also borrow. And what have we been seeing in the last year? The nonstop increase in interest rates. Now, eventually those increases spread out to all businesses and private equity is no different, right? As rates go up and the cost of capital goes up. What I have seen is kind of the consistency or freezing, if you will, of the multiples being offered, the price points or the enterprise value that you're seeing. Groups are being more conservative about how far they'll go. So I'm seeing a little bit of a reluctance to reach or maybe a bit of a higher purchase price than a group wanted to offer than maybe they would have a year ago, where they might have reached a little faster and now they're kind of pumping their brakes. So I'm seeing consistency also in valuation where, if I get 3 or 4 letters of intent in on a client's practice, I'm sometimes, I'll make up a hypothetical, the letters of intent come in and all 4 are between, a 6 times and a 6.5 times multiple. Mm-hmm. That's telling you something where in the past, I might have gotten anywhere from a 6 to an 8 times multiple, depending on, if a particular organization wanted to be more aggressive, or maybe this particular practice they thought, fit their geographical footprint very well. There could have been a lot of different motivating factors. Maybe they have a nearby practice and they have a long-term view that these could be merged together, but I'm not seeing as much of that. So I'm not prepared to say that pricing has gone down because I have not seen that. I feel like it has stabilized and it's gotten much more consistent throughout different DSOs.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, it reminds me a little bit of the housing market, right? It used to be you just put your sign or get your sign out there and you've got like 30 bids and they're all over asking price, right? And people are fighting for it. They're becoming a little bit more conservative, which is really better for the better for the profession, I would say. But the honeymoon, I wouldn't say the honeymoon's over, but just throwing money at dental practices, that's over. And I also think that's so important. Another little thread through that, William, is that they have to have someone like you that's reading these contracts on a daily basis go over it, because there's so many little nuances to the contracts. And you mentioned that in your article on how you get paid out, I can't explain it all. I was reading your article. This is like really in depth, but you have to, if you're a seller, you have to really make sure you understand what you're signing away. Because again, you're signing your practice away to someone that has this business acumen and a lot of people on their side that know the business speak, the acquisition, and the merger speak that a general dentist may not have. So I think that is really important. So if a doctor is considering doing a DSO deal and he wants to go to marketplace, because a lot of them are, the people, it's like they get to the point where like, I'm done with people. I just want to practice. And they want to do the deal. What should they do first, and how can you help them?
So here's where when people come to me or my existing clients come to me and they're looking for help on this exact question, what's the best way to get started? I always tell them, I don't go into any kind of negotiation, or as they say, you don't ask questions that you don't already know the answer to. So I start telling clients they should conduct a self-analysis. And what I do is I give them first a list of the materials or the information that most DSOs are going to ask for, so that we could take a look at that information and see if there's any issues, but also just understand like the kind of data they're going to have to compile. But most importantly is you have to have a real understanding of your EBITDA, your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It is this number that DSOs are going to base their enterprise value and make their offer off of that number. And that there will be a multiple of that number offered, and how high or low the multiple goes depends on a lot of different factors, right? Is it specialty versus general dentistry? Is it mostly fee for service? Is it heavily insurance based? Is the EBITDA a large number, that it's in the million or millions? or is it a smaller practice where it might be 2 or 3 or 400,000? These will all impact the price. But what I tell clients is you can't go to a DSO and give them a whole bunch of information and your tax returns and your profit and loss statement, and then get a letter of intent back where they've said, we're making you this offer based on this EBITDA and this multiple, and here's the offer. And maybe that number is higher than you thought it would be throughout your career when you thought about it. And you think, wow, I can't believe somebody offered me that much for my practice. But meanwhile, it might be a terrible offer. Your practice could be worth significantly more than that, but you don't even know what your EBITDA is because you haven't done the analysis. You're trusting a third party. And I can tell you on a regular basis, not in a sinister way, but they have conservative models that they plug in using your P&L and that spits out a number, which later on in the actual transaction phase goes through a very, very deep analysis called the quality of earnings assessment, where they will ultimately drill down to the penny on that number. But the initial offer, it's kind of an estimate or a guesstimate, an educated estimate. So I tell my clients, hey, let's go through that process ourselves, whether it's using your existing accountant or a specialty accountant who comes in on a project basis, not a very expensive endeavor, to basically take your last 12 months or your last year and adjust it accordingly as if this were corporate America or as if this were post-closing, which means, you engage in the process of adding back discretionary expenses that, would not exist post-closing after a transaction. Like, maybe you took a trip for continuing education and there were components of it that were really personal and not all business, but you took the whole thing as a business expense. Not uncommon, but, that would be something that wouldn't be necessarily an expense post-closing. That would increase your EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing if maybe you own the building that you're in and you're paying yourself a very high above market rent. When you sell to a DSO, you might adjust the rent down to market, but because now that's less of a monthly expense, that would actually increase your EBITDA, increase your price. So that's where you start. I knew there was a question. I knew I was going to get to the answer in my long-winded way, but you start by knowing your own value. So now when you go to a DSO and you're looking for an offer and they come back, you can say, well, here's my quality of earnings assessment. Here's my sales side quality of earnings. I think my EBITDA is $200,000 more than what you're saying. And here's why. And I'm happy to share all this backup data with you. You now go into that negotiation from a position of strength because you know your numbers. You're not just waiting to hear something spit out at you and say, oh, I had a client call me just recently. Do you think this is a good offer? I said, are you confident that that's your EBITDA number? I don't know.
Oh,
well,
yeah. Oh, my God.
And they didn't know their EBITDA number. Their accountant said, well, typically dental practices went for 75% of the average gross, and this is 100% of gross. So sounds like a good deal. But guess what? Not a good deal, because if you had an EBITDA that was, $700,000 and somebody was paying you a 7 times multiple, and your annual gross was 3 and you could have gotten $4.9 million, 1 times gross wasn't such a good offer, was it?
Yeah,
But
we're talking about a lot of money here to make a mistake and actually be a little lazy on how you actually, go into the transactions, right? Oh my God.
Spend a little money. I always tell clients, spend a little money, spend a little time up front and go about it the right way. Go to the marketplace, knowing your information, having all your reports that they're going to want to see, being totally prepared. It's a much different experience. And then, as you said earlier, when you get to that phase, you have to be surrounded with the right professionals. Your lawyer, your accountant. Do they do these deals? You may love your accountant and they may be fine and you may use them for the rest of your life, but maybe for this event in your life, maybe you'll bring in a specialist for that event. No different than, maybe I need an implant and not every dentist can do the implant for me. Maybe I need to go to a specialist. It's really no different. Bring in the right accountant, the right lawyer, and your local lawyer who you've used for everything, and you're going to do when you sell your house or whatever it is, great, fine, keep using them. But for this particular life-changing event, the single biggest asset for many doctors that they've created in their lifetime, it's the time in your life to say, no, 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 I'm going to get the best experts to be on my team for this because there's too much at stake to just, hope for the best. That would be foolish.
Exactly. It's like, I want to have a root canal on my third molar by somebody that does them every day, all day long, and loves it, not the generalist, right? So I think that is so wise. And the other question that pops in, I want to end with this. I don't think it's ever too early to start thinking about that elegant exit. If you're, say you 5 years out, when is it time for them to start putting those things into place, William, to get the maximum value out of their practice? So often they let go, a year, 2 years before they're going to sell. And that's not the right way to do it. When should they get in touch with you?
So really, I'll answer that a couple of ways. As far in advance as possible. But one of the things to think about for all the doctors that are out there who are thinking, I might want to explore one of these DSO deals. It could be the right thing for me. Keep in mind that in the current market right now, most DSOs want you to sign a 5-year employment agreement post-closing. So if you are sitting around right now and you're saying, I think I'd like to retire in 5 years, or I'd like to slow down. I'd like to drop a couple of days a week in 5 years. Remember that they're going to want your current schedule as in place now for the next 5 years. That doctor has to get going on their process. Now, if you've got a 10-year time horizon, you don't have a gun to your head. You're in a better place, because some DSOs won't even do a deal for less than 5, maybe 4 years of employment. Others, if they're willing to do it, they're going to discount your practice. You're going to get, if you say, well, I got to be out in 3 years, they're going to factor in a risk component to that might say, hey, we might not have adequate replacement in place, or this could be an issue for us. If we're still going to proceed, we're going to have to look at potentially discounting this practice, because we're going to be assuming a little more risk than we want to, because we know the doctor has one foot out the door. Yeah. So if it's a DSO deal, you got to be thinking, 5 years in advance, you want to be getting a deal done, hopefully. And in doctor-to-doctor transactions, I would say the time horizon is at least as long, because if you have a larger practice, it may require you to kind of bring somebody in and maybe start with a minority partnership where they buy in for 20 or 25 or 30%. And it might be a process to get them to the point where the practice can sustain what I'll call like the rest of the buyout. Because you could end up in a situation where maybe it's going to be 2 doctors that have to buy you out because you've built the practice so large. That's a possibility. But as much advanced as possible, and understanding your numbers and how to increase your profitability and make you always want to be selling on an upslope. Even if it's a slight or gradual upslope, you want to be selling when things look good. You don't want to be selling when it's like, well, I'd like to be retired in 3 or 4 years. The practice is a little bit down, and I'd like to get the best purchase price ever. Probably not going to happen, right? Yeah. So
that is such great advice. Oh, such great advice. So think about it if you're listening to this, on either coming in or going out of your career, and how you want to do that. The right way to do it. There is the right way. And I think that William laid that out for you today. And so, William, how do we find you? How do we get your books? Tell us about that.
Sure, absolutely. So my book it is available on Amazon, but a little bit of a secret. If you reach out for us, which you can do through our website, which is mblawfirm.com, or you can email me, wbarrett@mblawfirm.com. We'll send out a courtesy copy to the listeners, and we also have it in audiobook, and we're happy to do that. And that's really the best way to get a hold of me is either through our website, mblawfirm.com, or shoot me an email, wbarrett@mblawfirm.com. I'd be delighted to talk to anybody about transactions. As you might have gathered, I kind of love this stuff. It kind of makes me tick. Yeah. So, it's always my pleasure to have a conversation, and this is fun for me. So.
Well, I'm just so glad. I'm so glad that we could feature you in our autumn edition, and especially along with Jeremy Krell and Revere Partners. We got a lot of these transactions and mergers and acquisitions going on in the industry, and it's lovely to have experts like you to help us out. So, thank you for joining me today. Reach out if to William if you would like to get some help and have a successful exit and entry into your profession. So nice. And listen, everybody, the most important thing for you to do is keep doing you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, William.
Thanks, Ian. Take care. Thank you so much for having me on.